All right. How y'all doing? Welcome to the Exercise, Science, and Culture Show, episode 11. This is Matt Hines, and tonight I want to talk about physical activity for youths, So when it comes to exercising and children, there is maybe more than anything else, there is one misnomer, and that's around resistance training for kids. So I want to address this first. So should kids do resistance training? The answer is yes. Even little kids, as long as they are able to go through a full range of motion under control in whatever exercise they're doing, this is good. And the thing is, kids will do this in play. We are too scared of resistance for children. And just to be clear, the only activity that will stunt the growth of a kid, the only way that happens is if they get fractured on a growth plate of one of their bones. And the reality is, though, that this is less likely to happen if they are training and they have good coaching and there's an awareness in body mechanics and what they're doing. There's another way that could possibly stunt the growth, which is overtraining, which is another important consideration for children. If they're doing something too much, if they're doing too much of something too soon, too often, this is the recipe for an overuse injury. And I suppose that also could stunt their growth. I mean, if they're doing too much work and they're not getting enough nutrients and calories, that can stunt your growth for sure. So that's really the bigger issue. And if a kid does get hurt, period, they're going to have a bad time. They're going to have to sit out for valuable skill training opportunities, and they may have a harder time down the road in sticking with fitness due to structural damage that they might have gotten. I talk to a lot of people who are my age now and like, oh yeah, I used to be able to do this, I used to be able to do that, but like my knees. And well, I think there's two parts to this. First of all, I think there's targeted exercises that you could do now, but that's off the topic. What we can do now for the kids who are currently training and coming up in fitness is to make sure that we have a mind for their doing appropriate activities and just the right amount of them. So I'll go more in detail in just a moment. But even bigger than all that, if we're talking about training kids, rule number one in supporting children through physical activity, it's the fun factor. The more fun it is, the more they will want to do it. And the more likely they will be to adopt physical activities as part of their lifestyle. This will affect their health span, okay? Health span, not just lifespan, but health span. It will affect their happiness. So the main question is, how do we make it fun? Let's first recognize that there are some kids where sports and fitness will be hugely significant form of expression for them. Much of their sense of identity and community will grow around physical activities. For others, this will happen to a far lesser degree, and that's okay. They're probably doing something else. They might be great artists. They might want to be politicians or teachers. And really, this is their choice. Forcefulness on the part of parents, teachers, and coaches in either direction will result in negative associations with physical activity. Nonetheless, For all, it is very clear that physical activity is very important. The American CDC guidelines. They came out with this back in 2008. Probably needs to be updated, but the general guidelines are pretty clear. Okay, so children and adolescents should receive 60 minutes or more of physical activity daily. Most of that should be either moderate or vigorous intensity aerobic physical activity, as they call it, and should include vigorous intensity physical activity at least 3 days a week. It should include muscle strengthening as part of the 60 minutes or more of daily physical activity. At least 3 times a week, there should be some muscle strengthening. What does that mean? I don't know, but we can go into that more in just a moment. Bone strengthening, which I would argue that these two things kind of go hand in hand, but that should also be included at least 3 days a week, according to the CDC recommendation for youths. There's the Canadian guidelines, which are more recent. These also really, they really emphasize sleep. I mean, up to 9 to 11 hours for those under age 13, 8 to 10 for those 14 to 17. Consistent bed, consistently going to bed and waking up at around the same time. I can go on about how important this is for everybody too, sleeping posture, but I'm going to save that for another episode. Several hours of a variety of structured and unstructured light physical activities, no more than 2 hours per day of recreational screen time, which I don't know about that. I say if you're getting your vigorous activity, you can have as much screen time as you want. I mean, personal preference kind of thing, but whatever, that's their recommendation. And limited sitting for extended periods of time. Tell that to school administrators. But it is what it is. That's their recommendation. That's the Canadian recommendation. So we need to understand moderate to vigorous, because this is something that you hear in any literature around children's physical activity recommendations. So exercise experts measure activity in metabolic equivalents, or METs. One MET is defined as the energy it takes to sit quietly. For the average adult, this is about 1 calorie per every 2.2 pounds of body weight per hour. Someone who weighs 160 pounds would burn approximately 70 calories an hour while sitting or sleeping. Pardon me for just a moment. So, moderate intensity activities are those that get you moving fast enough and strenuous enough to burn off 3 to 6 times as much energy per minute as you would when you're sitting quietly. So 3 to 6 METs. Vigorous activity is more than 6 METs. But as we're measuring METs, it's important to remember that it's not like you can say one particular activity is going to be the same amount of METs for everybody. A less fit person going for a vigorous walk, that's going to be higher METs for them as compared to a very fit person. So just keeping that in mind. Okay, so I look at it this way. The degree of intervention on the part of parents, guardians, teachers, and coaches to facilitate opportunities for the kids to be adequately physically active is necessary. They depend on us for these opportunities. And also, I want you to note that following these guidelines, okay, so if a kid is taking part in a sport and involved in physical activity through school, and maybe they're also very active during free play times and they have free play times, then they're going to be satisfying their physical activity recommendations. And you should feel good about that. But if they don't have these opportunities, we're going to have to go the extra mile to facilitate this. And either way, it can be difficult to motivate at times, especially when they reach puberty. This is where participation drops off. Pre and post pubescent children, are there guidelines for how to best intervene? Because there has got to be some intervention on the part of the coaches and the teachers, etc. And so I think there are some really good guidelines for this. There's been a lot of research done on this. And my takeaway from all of the research is that it's really important that we require kids to participate in some sort of physical activity, but we must give them options and let them choose, increasingly giving them choice as they get a little bit older. Beyond that, we must give maximum opportunities to participate. Those opportunities should be balanced amounts of structured skill practice, structured performance, and unstructured physical activity or free play. Okay, so you have like your practicing, your skill practice, where you have a coach giving you drills to do, but then you have your gameplay, but then you also have just time when they're messing around and doing it kind of their way. Maybe it's not by the rules, but that unstructured play time is really important as well. And you can think of it also in different terms. Say you have like a dancing athlete. Well, giving that dancing athlete some opportunities to just goof around and do something else, but also working on particular skills and balancing in a certain amount of actual performance when they have to perform their skill, because that has benefit too. You know, it doesn't have to be necessarily a competitive thing, but there's something to be said for having an event where you're going to have to perform. It's a motivator. It can be a motivator if you do it properly. And lastly, it's important to set kids up with appropriate activities. Not too hard, not too easy. If you can do it just right, you win, they win. All right? And from here, there are several different aspects of this that we could talk about, but I want to focus on how to determine if an activity is appropriate and how we as facilitators can maximize participation and help kids make fitness a lifestyle. So you have to ask the question when you're, you have to ask the question, is this appropriate for my kid? And the most surefire way to do this, I think, is to do some sort of assessment. And the physical assessment that I have up on the 12-week challenge page is a great way to do this. You can start from there. You can look at their fundamental movements and how they execute them. If they can do them with proficiency, then they can incorporate that movement into whatever other activities they're doing. If they can't yet do that, then it's not yet an appropriate exercise. And that should be the emphasis of the skill training portion of their physical activities. That's the thing that you should, any structured activities, that's what you should focus on. So say a kid, a lot of kids have a hard time. Well, some kids have a hard time squatting. They just don't get it. Well, that's what you should teach them. You should teach them how to squat. Other kids can squat like way better than just amazingly well. Well, for them, they don't necessarily need skill practice on that. And they can go ahead and they can load that squat up a little bit progressively. So but the idea of having a physical assessment and take something that's more like a skill, going back to dancing. and I'm not very familiar with dancing, but think about if you're having to do a spin while you're on one leg. Well, if the kid can't yet balance on one leg without spinning, certainly they have no business yet doing a spin on one leg. So you have to crawl before you walk, so to speak. So now, thinking about participation, let's talk about good versus poor structured skill practice. What you don't want during these periods, and let's assume now that you have a group of kids that you're working with, what you don't want to see during the skill practice is one kid doing the skill while the others are like waiting. Like any situation where you have just one kid going at a time, you have to change it up. You need to get them all going and getting as many opportunities to practice those skills as possible. As many opportunities to participate as possible. And then timely feedback on that. So if they're doing the squats inappropriately, when you say, okay, let's do squats, and one kid is lifting their heels, and every time that they do it, catch it right away. Say, hey, heels down. And reinforce that every time they lift the heel up, heels down, heels down, heels down. And you may need to say it like 100 times, but the 101th time that you do it, they're going to get it. They will get it eventually. But say it over and over again. And the more concise your cue can be, the more relatable it will be. And you may need to try to find just the right cue that's going to reach that kid. Okay. And the same idea for gameplay. Good gameplay versus bad gameplay. It's all about opportunities to participate. What I don't like to see is when kids are sitting on the bench the whole time. That shouldn't happen. A good coach will get all kids in the game, maybe not equal playing time, but all kids will play in every game. They need opportunities, and maybe they're not the most skilled kids yet, but they're certainly not going to get more skilled if they don't get good game time, game action. And also, and I've had this situation happen before as a coach in youth sports, where you have like one team that's totally stacked and it's got like the best players. That's so silly. That doesn't help anybody. That doesn't help those kids who are the best players, because they're going to smoke the other teams every week, and that's not going to be helping them develop their skills. Equal matchups. I do my after-school sports program, and a couple of times I've had 8 kids, and it's worked out really well because 4 of them are at a, they're at a certain level, and the other 4 are at a higher level. So I split them up. And we do 2-on-2s, and that usually works out really well. Every kid gets max opportunities of like appropriate gameplay. So as a coach, that's your job. As a teacher, that's your job, to facilitate appropriate matchups. And here's another note. As far as team sports go, I think that cutting kids from teams without giving them another opportunity to participate, that is a terrible practice. We should not cut kids from teams. At least let them on the practice squad. If it's an issue where you can only bust so many kids, there's only so many jerseys, whatever, I can understand that. But at least let them practice with you. Don't cut kids. That's heartbreaking. That's heartbreaking. Don't cut kids from teams. I want to share an article. This is related to the importance of fun and purposeful exercise. And we're amid an obesity epidemic with our children. We recognize that generally our kids are getting fatter statistically. This is a problem. And all the research that's around this is talking about how do we get kids more physically active. And we hear these 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity. What does that mean? What does that look like? Well, there needs to be a consideration for not just the quantity, but also the quality of the activity. Let me just read this really quick. Current recommendations for physical activities in children overlook the critical importance. Oh, he's talking about skill. Okay. It overlooks the critical importance of motor skill acquisition early in life. Instead, they focus on quantitative aspects of physical activity and select health-related components of physical fitness, like aerobic fitness, muscular strength, muscular endurance, etc. This focus on exercise quantity in youth may limit considerations of qualitative aspects of program design, which include skill development, socialization, and enjoyment of exercise. The timing of brain development and associated neuroplasticity of motor skill learning makes the pre-adolescence period a critical time to develop and reinforce fundamental movement skills in boys and girls. So skill development is really important. If you don't have the skills, if you don't learn the skills at a young age, you're going to be behind, and then it's going to be like embarrassing when you join in a game, and you're going to develop a negative association with physical activity. Okay, so lastly for today, I want to refer you to Don Hellison. He is he's done a lot of cool research and has a lot of cool personal experience. Let me go to one of the articles he wrote and talk to you about his philosophy. And he talks all about teaching physical and social responsibility through physical activity. And it's abbreviated TPSR. What is it? It believes that in teaching physical education, we can teach life skills as well. Teaching personal and social responsibility is about using physical education as a means to teach a code or discipline to students. It is the intention that this code becomes integrated and internalized by the students and gives them structure for their lives, values, inner discipline, and that these skills are not only seen in the gym, but are transferred to other aspects of their lives. I'm going to link you to this article. Please read this article if you care about how to reach kids around physical activity. But one thing that I lastly will share with you are his levels and how you want to progress in these levels. So at level 0, there's an egocentric mentality. There's a lack of self-control. You're not a team player. We've seen this in children. Okay. And using his system is all about reaching a kid that's at that stage and helping them develop morally in this fashion. At level 1, it's respecting the rights and feelings of others, self-control, and peaceful conflict solving. Moving on to level 2, it's effort and cooperation. You're getting along. You're being a self-starter. You're trying new tasks. At level 3, you're self-directed. You're on task. You're setting and sticking to personal goals and resisting peer pressure. At level 4, you're helping others. You're a leader. You're showing caring, sensitivity, and concern for others in the class. And at level 5, you're taking a TPSR outside of the gym. You're integrating it. You're integrating those values into other areas of life, and you're being a role model. And by the way, this can apply just as well to all of us as adults. So I think we've got some good food for thought down for today. I'm going to leave it at that. You can say, like, it is 40 degrees outside right now, just so you know. This is for your entertainment value, because look at this. It's a beautiful, beautiful night despite the weather. Thank you, Sarah, George Mataragas. Thank you to my mother, Michael Connors, Rick Mercurio, Dana, and Kelly for tuning in tonight. I hope you enjoyed the show. Share it with your friends if you think this would be pertinent information to them. And if you have any questions, please send me a message. Have a great week, and I will catch up with you soon.